Hi, I'm Sean Windle with ERP Advisors Group, your trusted ERP advisors. Why do companies outgrow their software? In a lot of years of experience, combined, we have over 100 years of experience in this space. And so when we talk about and kind of step back from all the projects that we're doing and look for the trends, these are really the reasons that we see companies going through software changes. These are good reasons to go through a transition. We have growth, legacy technology, maybe there's regulatory changes, or new leadership. So, I should mention this too, along the way, we kind of put in some very practical tips. So I always look for nuggets in presentations. There's nuggets. The nuggets are down here. These are the things that not only do you get a good breakfast, but take the nuggets with you, please, if you're looking at software for sure. So when you think about growth for an organization, as the slide says here, we have more business transactions to track. There's new products and services that you're bringing to the market. You may also have new markets that you're selling to, have new business lines and M&A activity. So these are kind of the expansion of a business that you're experiencing, and some of the companies we talked to earlier are going through some of those trends right now. And so when you start looking at the changes and what happens within a business, and you have an existing software and the business is growing, you literally can outgrow the software. Now you may be able to plug that with some spreadsheets, and everybody uses lots of spreadsheets, which is America's favorite accounting system called MS Excel. It works. Next behind that's QuickBooks, like literally. And that's great, right? Because when you're going through and you're experiencing growth and you have a new recurring revenue model, or you have a new geography that you're bringing up, or whatever it is, and the system's not set up to support it, you still got to report on it. Like, you don't have a choice. So come up with a solution, right? But after a while, you start to outgrow those. It's more than bailiwick. It's, like the problem that we have with Excel. Even in our business, we use Excel a lot, although we just switched to a new resource planning system. Excel's good, but as we know, there can be mistakes. Sometimes spreadsheets aren't backed up. They might be on somebody's desktop, and there may be a problem with that desktop, and it blows up, and your key spreadsheet, kind of laughing there. Yeah, we've had that happen before. And probably the biggest issue is that spreadsheets are good at that specific moment in time that you enter the data, and that's it, right? Once you enter the data, it's old. Something's changed, versus having more of an enterprise system that's being constantly updated by different people versus just one that can hit a spreadsheet. So growth is a great reason to switch software for sure. So we have had clients for legacy technology that have, there's two companies specifically, and there's the guy you might have been meeting with yesterday, that's another story on legacy technology. But we had two clients specifically. I won't say their names, but both were fairly kind of business to consumer businesses, lot of transactions. And both those companies had custom written their operating software. So it did accounting. I'll pick on one of them that was a retailer. So there was a point of sale, there was an inventory system, pricing. All that was written in a proprietary system. And it was written on an older application. And over time, as the business grew, they were able to keep up with the business because the software was written for this particular industry, right? I mean, the reality of a commercial off-the-shelf application is it's not written for your specific business. Now, if you customize the heck out of it, it is, right? But in this instance, they had written something, an app in the 90s, and then, 2010 timeframe, the person who wrote it wanted to die. Like, he's like, I'm done. I want to go away. I don't want to be stuck here all the time having to support this legacy system. Just let me go off and retire or whatever he wanted to do. And at that point, the client came to us and said, I don't know what to do on this because I've put 20 years of development into it, but we've continued to grow and to expand, but this key resource is leaving. So that is a great reason to switch out on software for sure, where your legacy technology is not supported. Real quickly, a couple of the other things here. Regulatory, so there's definitely some changes coming down with the revenue recognition rules here in 2018, which is a big tagline for software vendors right now. It's ASC 606, I think is the number. which is kind of changing from the revenue recognition calculations that don't have to deal with it. You're lucky, to say the least. But there are real reasons why when you look at your software solution, if it doesn't meet the regulatory requirements, it's probably time to look for something that does. And then the last kind of category is on new leadership. So we have a client right now that Carl and I are doing some work with that went from a CFO to a CEO position. And he's a very aggressive, modern approach to managing a business from a P&L balance sheet perspective. And it was more of an operating company before. And we know he's going to want a system that automates the entire business, not just their manufacturing, as I mentioned, not just order entry to work orders to bill of materials and QC and all that, right? He wants all the way from lead tracking, marketing automation, all the way through to customer support, the entire business on one platform, so that he and his people have a view, a window into the organization and can run it. So very often a good reason to switch software is new leadership. And really beyond that, there aren't many other reasons to switch. It's kind of a funny thing that you can boil it down to the four. There might be another one, but if there's something, if you're looking at new software right now in your businesses, how many people are kind of evaluating software or thinking about new software, right? If you're not doing it for one of these reasons, let's talk afterwards, because it may make sense not to do it. For instance, here's a great example. There was a firm, an oil and gas firm in Arizona that we worked with. It was actually part of one of the Native American tribes. And they had spent $500,000 on an oil and gas exploration production system. And they brought us in to take a look at, hey, we need a new solution. How do we handle this? And within about a day of talking to the users and understanding the background of how the software got implemented, as well as researching the software that they chose, which was quite strong, we said, whoa, don't switch this. That would be the worst thing that you could do. The problem was the people who implemented the software for this particular client quit. Like they left after the software was implemented, and a whole new team came in to take over the application. And the whole new team was saying, this software is terrible. Really what they were saying is, we don't know how to use it. And so when we came in, again, we were able to identify, and it sounds easy as I'm saying it. It seemed like it was hard at the time, but we were able to put together a plan that said, here, we're going to call the vendor. We're going to find out what kind of training they have. We'll talk to your people. We'll understand what the different areas of the application are that we need to understand how to use, put together a training plan. And we saved them at least $500,000, as well as the risk of switching to new software solutions. So that wasn't a good reason to change. My people don't know how to use the software is a terrible reason. Don't do that. There's got to be a better way. And then, if you go back, as I mentioned about these tips, I really, really mean this, right? Don't change software unless you have to, right? It's probably you can apply it to life. Like, don't move if you have to. We're moving, and don't make these major changes unless you have to. That's not to say that major changes are bad. It's actually the exact opposite. But if you can really look at your business and look at where you all are heading, look at your team, your ability to accept the change and understand it, and it just like makes sense, like it clicks in, right? If you come across something, you're like, oh, I think we need to change, but we're too busy. The too busy is actually a good reason why not to change in some instances. So, I'd like to give you what I would call stable datums, things you can hold on to from this meeting, and that's probably the best one, is don't change software unless you have to. Just one more story, too. I love the stories. They're fun. We have a client that when we engaged with them was about 50 million. Well, let me take a step back. So they're a bakery. And when you think of a bakery, you think of like a corner bakery, right? And so Steve talks about his bakery, and we're like, oh, that's cool, you're a baker. Wow, that's amazing. And then we go to see his business, and it's a $50 million bakery. So he's baking a lot of stuff, right? And his firm, the company engaged us to look at their technology and determine if it was actually a legacy application that they needed to switch or not. So we went in, looked at the app, looked at the vendor, understood the vendor's, the owner's transition plan, right? When you're working with a smaller software firm, you really need to understand how long they're going to be in business for. And sometimes when you have a small software firm of maybe 20, 30, 40 people, the owner is really driving the strategy. And if she's in her late 60s, she's going to be gone soon, right? So that's actually what ended up happening was the vendor was kind of at a point where they were looking at a transition. But the technology worked. The functionality was fine for this particular business. So we came back and said, look, don't change, but let's get some code escrowed. Let's talk to them. Code escrow is where you actually get the vendor's code, like the software code, and put it somewhere, like there's special banks that are kind of created to do this, so that if they default or they go out of business, you can have access to the code. Which sounds good, but then you have to have developers that know the code. So it's a little bit of risk prevention, but not a lot. But then we said, we want to have the owner come in to your shop. We want him to see how big you are, and we want him to promise that he and his son, who is coming into the business, were going to be able to support you all. So we got that in place, which was great. The problem, but at the end we said, but if you continue to grow, you've already outgrown these guys, but you really, you're going to need to do something eventually. And it's going to be painful because you have a lot of growth, but you're going to have to do it. It's kind of like flying an airplane and you're up at 38,000 feet and you need to switch out an engine, right? Like, it's a little scary. You're going to lose some altitude and you might even come close to crashing, but keep it up. Ugh. So as it turned out, that $50 million business in 2010 is now a $200 million business. And if you ever go to, we love these guys, so we have to plug them. If you ever go to Starbucks, you have to buy the cake pops, which are the little sticks with the little pops. I mean, they're like super rich. If you're on any kind of diet, don't do it. But they're super amazing. So SR Originals makes those cake pops, as well as a lot of desserts that you eat at restaurants. So, I mean, very pervasive company, great people. But they've looked at the software, and we've talked to them even very recently, and they've just said, it's fine. Like, we're working around the system, and we're not going to change it. So even though they're going through growth, major growth, they've said it's too much, it's too risky to the business. Hi, I'm Sean Windle with ERP Advisors Group, your trusted ERP advisors.